So these are two brave ladies full of knowledge. So Roni Bell talking about the abandonment list. I had never heard of an abandonment list until she brought my attention to it. We have Holly Cremeens from Grand Junction. Roni Bell has taken on water engineers, as has Holly.
I consulted with several experts. I'm not a hydrologist. I'm not an attorney. That's my full disclaimer. I'm just a person who has a real passion about understanding what the heck is going on, because it doesn't add up. And so I have a lot of top people that I use for statutes over here and the hydrology over here. What is abandonment? It basically is 10 years that you can prove non-use. And that includes, you can paint a pump, you can paint your stock tank, you can, make a simple maintenance or any kind of maintenance. Division of Water Resources. That's who manages all the water statewide. And so they're the ones that decide. My husband got a letter on one little tiny dinky little water right that he has on the farm. The letter reads, in accordance with has compiled a list of absolute water rights that he or she has determined to have been abandoned in whole or in part, and which previously have not been adjudged to have been abandoned. You are receiving this letter as an owner, operator, or potentially interested party for the water rights on the attached list, to provide you notice that the water rights shown have been determined by the division engineer to have been abandoned. A complete list, well, that just goes into the minutia, and there's approximately 2,000 water rights, and this is in Water District 1, which is the northern Colorado, Weld County, that whole area there, and that all received a letter of in abandonment on their water rights.
What are they doing with this abandoned water?
Well, look at that. I think he knows.
It's called theft.
No, they claim they do this regularly, but they haven't done this regularly.
Yeah.
And
Now, is this the Water Resources saying they've done this regularly?
no, it's the division. It's the division engineer. It's the state.
Oh.
It's totally the state. The Colorado.
The water engineer.
Yeah, the Colorado Division of Water Resources. It's the big kahuna.
So Jim, in our state, we have 7 water districts.
Water district.
Yes.
And so we then, Grand Junction, us, Gunnison, and I can't remember, Uray, we all are in the same water district, but we have different associations inside that district.
Okay.
So Holly is under a different association than what we are. You and I and Bob, and probably most everybody in here are the Uncompahgre Valley water users. So, to my knowledge, I don't know if anybody has received an abandonment letter like what Roni has received. But when Roni received that, she felt it very important to get out to the 7 water districts and find out who has been put on this abandonment list. And because most people aren't even aware, right? Isn't that what you told me, Roni?
They should receive a letter.
But if they didn't open it, they wouldn't know.
If they didn't open it, they wouldn't know, but you can go on the Colorado Division of Water Resources website. You can go on their website, and you can actually pull up the whole entire state. That's what I did. This is just the Division 1. But you can pull up the whole entire state, and it will have the list of all of the water rights. And it's really important that you use the words water rights and not well or surface or anything like that. Water rights.
All that stuff comes under it, probably. Who gives these water engineers their rights?
Who gives them their rights?
Yes.
Well, it's the state. They were the 7 water districts were formed in 1969, and that's when the state engineers were supposed to administer water and prior appropriation. They are supposed to do that all along, but the 1969 Water Administration Act, it actually defined basically the 7 districts and who was responsible for administering the water and prior appropriation. But when I heard that over here on which
On the Uncompahgre River and on the Gunnison River.
I don't understand how they're administering the water there when they got it tied to the land, plus taking, say for example, 50% cuts. I don't understand that, because when the water runs out, the water runs out, and the junior don't get delivery.
Well, when the water runs low, they start allotting us less water.
That's what Barbara was
Yeah.
saying.
They'll get, we can go down to 40% sometimes because of drought.
Right, and
That's
I
all it
understand
is.
that, but I don't understand how they could just make a blanket statement, you know, you have to do this. But I can understand how junior would start to dwindle out. But, you know, here's the flip side of it. Why aren't they administering in your full allotment quantity? And then when it runs out, it runs out.
Yeah,
So-
well, they try to engineer it out to where it'll last.
I think part of it too is, the way I understand it is, when they first brought Uncompahgre out, certain landowners were first in the list. So as people have been added to the list, you have like first in right, second in right, third in right. So those people that have been first in right the longest, the most land and stuff, they'll get priority over the ones that were added 30 years later that only have 2 acres.
That's not necessarily true. It's those that have priority water rights on the river. So they come before the association. They have their water rights before the association. They're right on the river. Either the Uncompahgre or the Gunnison is the way I understood that. Roger, am I saying that correctly?
I'm not an authority on it, but all of the water distributed by Uncompahgre Valley water users goes to the acreage that it's dedicated to, and the whole system was started and dedicated back in the 1910, 1909, 1910, 11. But we'd have to get a better source for information than me.
So it's stuff to write down and start asking some hard questions about.
Well, the first thing I would recommend that all of you do, regardless, is to get your abstracts. Get your whole chain of title. Go from the very beginning of when that land was, that water was first put to beneficial use. Find those documents, and that's going to really help you a lot.
Well, I would ask a question too here. These water engineers, they don't talk to us.
No.
So who do they talk to? The district or the board of directors of our districts or stuff like that?
To determine that something's been abandoned. I mean, how do they determine something's been abandoned?
Well, you know, that was
I mean,
kind
they
of,
don't talk to anybody.
as a layperson, what is your name?
I'm Jonna.
Hi, Jonna. As a layperson, that was my first thought. When I looked at this, I thought, did they trespass?
Right.
You know, are they flying drones? I mean, how did they, but then after talking with several different, you know, pretty smart people, I found out that this is something, a declaration that they do, supposed to be doing regularly, but they haven't. So I found this to be pretty curious that it comes down now, all of a sudden, and on so many parties.
Okay, so then why? Is it
Oh, I
coming
think,
down now?
I think they're trying to continue this pattern of confusion, and hopefully people will understand how they can protect their property rights by filling out the, I do not intend to abandon my water, and you can get the forms also on the website, and I don't think they're counting on that, and so when they don't hear from people, or people maybe fill out their forms, you know, they don't quite know how to fill out their forms, and so they're just taken from them,
And used for what?
or resold.
Two?
Oh, anybody, you know, cities, towns, whatever. I mean, I don't want to get into the criminality of it, but let's just say that there's an awful lot of corruption that's going on in the state of Colorado, but it's patternistic throughout the 17 western states that are under the old Spanish law.
So Holly, I'd like to bring you in on, at this point, in that you did find somebody in your area that was put on an abandonment list.
Okay, right. I knew of a water right, and when I was looking through the Division 5 at the list after talking or hearing about this, up on the Grand Mesa, my parents had a cabin, and there was a water right associated with a spring. It's called Glacier Spring Pipeline. And I knew that we, as cabin owners, used to get our water from that glacier spring. So I found it on the list, and that's why I'm here tonight.
Interesting, but was your name?
No, my name is not on
But
it.
it's whoever owns the glacier
It's-
spring.
Well, it's a subdivision of cabins up there, and somebody said that a lot of times they'll go unnoticed because a subdivision has a water right, and whoever was running the HOA or they didn't pay attention to it, and they move off and they don't have their correct address, or you know.
So here is an example of somebody being on a list and doesn't know that they're on a list.
Right. So I knew about the water right. I took it to the annual meeting that they just had a couple weeks ago, and everybody was like, "Oh, we don't really want to pursue that." And I, knowing water, said, "Yes, I'm going to pursue it." So that's
They weren't going to pursue protecting their own water right?
well, they don't understand it.
Mhm.
They think they have to pay something for it.
No.
They don't understand that they already own the right. Why
Yes.
would you want to just give it over to the state?
Are they still getting water from it?
They're not getting water from it.
Why are they not getting water from it?
They put in, because of the Colorado Health Department or the Mesa County Health Department, they had to put in a different system. So now instead of taking water out of a spring, they pump it out of Sunset Lake up on Grand Mesa to a filtration plant and then pump it to the cabins. So
So they're still getting water.
they're getting water, but
But
from
this spring really has been abandoned.
the spring has been abandoned. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you want to abandon your water right, because if the spring that they're taking water out of, and it's not really, they're not taking water from the spring, it's an augmentation program. The
Well, they-
spring runs into Sunset Lake, and then they're allowed to pump out of Sunset Lake through their filtration plant and then back to the cabins.
And I can understand that. We have two springs on our ranch over in the eastern slope, and they are registered with, I guess they're registered with the county, that we have two springs there. They give out so much water, and that's it. And that's as far as I know about it. We're using one is we're just letting run in the creek.
Right.
But we haven't abandoned them, but I can understand that one because they were forced to go to a different system.
But the thing is, there also has to be, excuse me, intent to abandon. You have to intend to abandon it according to the Colorado laws.
Well, it doesn't make it doesn't make is a water right is a water right, whether it's a well or a spring or from the river or whatever, it's a water right.
And it's adjudicated how much water.
Yeah, how much,
Is that
what the allotment
that's
quantity.
what it comes down to?
Yeah, and it is defined to the finite. It says, you know, the the decreed amount, the abandoned amount, which ironically it matched every one of them there. That was really interesting too.
Right.
And the decreed place of use, the adjudication date, the appropriation date, the administration number. So it's kind of to the finite, so it doesn't make any difference.
Yeah, it's still,
But it is defined, like ours here is defined as a well, but that doesn't make any difference.
it's,
It's just one of many ways that you use your water right. And,
well, they really haven't lost their rights, they just picked up water from a different source.
yeah, that water is still being used, so that, but also,
The association could take that water right, because it's going into Mesa Lake, and they could lease it?
well, who
Or-
owns it? That's
Well, the
I don't
cabin owner association owns the
the
water
water
right.
right?
Yes.
It does?
Yeah, they could build an augmentation pond and let so much water out for being sold. Or people have done this, they build augmentation ponds and then have sold the rights. Not the rights of the water, they sell the water to the stream.
Okay.
And that's happened, I know of a few, 2 or 3 of them anyway.
So-
That have done that. So they could sell the water.
So Holly, let's talk about demand management.
Oh, can I finish one thing about
Yes,
this? Okay,
yes.
so I think there's some monkey business going on with the water right, because it was a 1941 water right, and it was decreed for household. But then in the comment line, it says that it's only to be used, I don't have quite the right words, I'm sorry, to be used during a non-irrigation season.
I wonder who put that in there.
Yeah, and it was changed back in 1989,
You'd have to investigate to see who
Right.
changed that.
because, yeah.
Because most wells,
We have a question. We have a question.
How long ago did it come up, and did anybody measure how many gallons per minute your Glacier Spring is producing?
Well, it's on the paperwork from the state, it says, how much it was producing.
So they've measured it previously then?
I don't know that they get all of the right that comes out of the spring, but they get a certain portion of the right.
And then how long ago was this published that came to your attention?
I just found it in the last couple of weeks,
Okay.
because I looked on the abandonment list.
The one thing that I'm aware of going on that side of the mesa was when Bevan, clear down close to Mesa, was selling a lot of the water rights to what Powderhorn wanted to capture and do for making snow.
Yeah.
And at that time, they started looking at everybody's water rights in that whole area
Right.
and looking at anything. So they were picking up anything that might have been abandoned, and they were going back through old pieces of paper written on pencil because the records had not been kept for the town of Mesa down there forever. And it was just that, I can't remember his first name, but Bevan was going to sell all these rights that he was using for irrigating hay ground.
Mm-hmm.
And he was going to sell them to Powderhorn, but a lot of those rights weren't his. And that's why people started going through and looking for when people called for their irrigation water, clear over into Molina, around that whole area. And it did go to court, and the last I saw was that they could only use the water to feed the number of cattle that he was feeding on that property. The old guy has died since then.
Mm.
And last winter, I don't think they were running the cattle on there in the winter and feeding. I do know that this year, the amount of hay that they've put up. But that's what the state water said, that they could only sell the amount of water for running that number of head of cattle that he was doing on
So
that.
that must have been an original stock water right.
that I think Devin was an original stock water right, but because he controlled the ditch or was a ditch right or something, he was trying to sell all of it to Powderhorn.
Yeah,
And that's where Powderhorn is putting in a whole mile-long pipeline. And so I'm sure it's money talks,
Right.
and they're capturing any unused water that they could in the whole area.
but I thought you had to show proof of your stock certificate.
It depends on, did you have, was it a water right that you purchased or the old traditional? From my understanding, water rights came from the old homesteads that were using it before worrying about filing the paper. Those still have priority.
Absolutely, and that's why it's important to get those abstracts or get
And-
those original documents.
And so if you had the old water rights, like down through the Kiwanis camp, that there was always a stream running down through there, that a guy named Dick Lloyd always, and this was back in the 70s when I was aware of it, but the guy named Dick Lloyd always maintained that enough water could run through the fish ponds at the camp, because that was an Easter seal camp at that time. And so he always gave them enough water to run down through the fish ponds before it went on down to his property. Now, Dick Lloyd, I don't know how many years ago that he had passed away.
I wonder who has his certificates, his abstracts.
I have a different subject, I have a couple of comments, but.
So do you know that? Do you know who has his?
I don't anymore. He was just he was one of the original people that had owned that property and has been there from the time that my great-grandparents lived there.
So then does it just, if
It's
somebody doesn't have it, then,
Then that's
I
where they
wonder
were
what he's
picking
selling.
up.
What is this guy selling? Because you have to have proof of ownership and have your stock certificate, or your water share, your stock certificate. That's what you sell. You actually sell
When
that.
you're selling your water rights,
Yeah.
that's what you're selling.
Yeah,
And it
You
comes
can't
under
just-
the water law and to water court.
I'm
yeah.
sorry.
Comes under the water law and water court.
Yeah, it goes through that, yeah.
So anything else, Holly?
That was my first thought too, that water right was kind of already earmarked for Powderhorn.
It wasn't, because Powderhorn, in the olden days,
No, I mean, that somebody at the state had changed that water right so that it would be non-irrigating season only. Nobody uses a cabin in the winter with water. It doesn't work. It
Right.
freezes.
but
So,
but when you were talking about the years that it originally happened, those were the years that they were building all the way around Powderhorn.
mhm.
And like, that was where Bob Sizik, that owned the Board and Buckle Ski Shop, grew up around in that area. And that would be somebody that you could contact for a water source.
He's my cousin.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of think that back in, if you read on the internet, we was investigating land surface water. And somewhere back, I can't remember exactly, but back in 76, 79 or something like that, they changed the law. And I think that's probably when they changed everything. If they changed one surface water rights, they probably changed everything else.
But they can't do that.
Yeah, they can't. And could I just interrupt here for
Yeah.
a second? Because there's a lot of confusion about the application of prior appropriation. When you first put water to beneficial use, there's one thing that you need, and that's water. And that's why people downstream are junior, because the flow runs out. And so that's why you have the later dates and you have the senior vested and so forth and so on. That beneficial use of water could be anything. It could be to the mouth of a cow. It could be a well that you dug. It could be off of the river. It could be any number of ways. Water is water. Surface and ground are inseparable.
Usually
so-
the people upstream have the most
Right, the closer to the
water,
headwaters.
water rights.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
And so, because you have to have water to put it to
Yeah.
beneficial use to get that right. And so, what goes with that is three things, basically. You get water, which means surface and ground. Okay, it doesn't mean surface or ground. It doesn't mean well or, tributary. It means water. And then you get an appropriation date and you get an allotment quantity. Because when you first, when they first,
Where do you find these dates at?
you can find them on those old abstracts, you can find them in the different water
So in other
courts.
words, are they at the county level or do you have to go to the state level?
They should be at the county level. I know ours are in Weld County, in the Weld County Courthouse. Yeah. mhm.
Or so would the association have them?
Probably, maybe, I don't know, but, the best thing to do is just go to your county courthouse or just ask, call and say, where can I find the water records for Division 5?
Okay.
And just go directly there.
They'd probably be on the internet anyway. I know that's where we got the surface water stuff from.
And then you get your allotment quantity because when they first started developing water, they didn't know what their consumptive use was going to be. They didn't know how they were going to apply this water. But what has happened over a period of time, and in particular after 1969, is that they and I don't know who they are, but they surreptitiously started to reverse surface and ground and got that all surface and ground and reverse junior and senior. And it's been very confusing. I know I was extremely confused as a layperson, to such extent that my husband had to draw me cartoons so that I would kind of understand. He's lived on the same farm for his entire life, and our farm is 150 years old or something like that. Anyway,
So Bob,
yeah.
I'm going to share just a couple things. I've been kind of studying water since I moved here 22 years ago. I came from Wisconsin where there was a lot of water.
And you're under the English,
Pardon?
and you're under the English riparian law. Mhm.
So I just happened to see about 15 years ago, this man became the water king of Colorado. He moved here thinking he was going to be a rancher. I happened to see a full write-up in the Denver Post, an entire page. The man was worth about $500 million. He's basically the one who sold all the water to Denver.
Was that Gary Boyce?
I don't know a name. All I remember is the write-up because it really made an impression on me.
He's since deceased, but
He
in
figured out
Baca County?
how to move a lot of that water from the San Luis Valley. Just
Yeah.
most of the water to Denver came from this guy's.
and now the San Luis Valley is,
I'm just saying. So one of the things a couple things I want to bring up. So I grew up on a farm where there was so much water. There was one spring that was dedicated for a 13-acre lake, spring-fed, that was never put in. And it created its own creek that was 5 feet wide and 6 inches deep, okay? So in the 80s, it was about 15 years ago, I happened to take a trip to the Midwest, and I was driving because I missed a plane because of a snowstorm, so I had to drive. And I picked up a public radio station. They were talking about many of the small oil companies that went out of business in the 80s, bought up farms in the Midwest for the water rights, okay? And I'm also connected very much to Arizona. I work with Fresh Citrus down there in these farmers. And one of them is very knowledgeable. You can't put 5 million people in a desert oasis like the Phoenix area and expect that they're not coming after our water. They are.
Of course.
Their aquifers are going down, so they're figuring out every way they can to do it. And I'm going to bring to our attention here publicly something I learned here just recently. We, off the OCID ditch and the other ditches here, have the rights to a certain amount of water in the Gunnison River. That there was a pumping station just down the road from my house down here that used to be. It's still there, but it's abandoned. He said we have less than a year before we start pulling that water up or we're going to lose it because it technically would be abandoned. because it hasn't been pulled and the pumping station's not functional. Huge amount of water.
So have you looked on the abandonment list?
I didn't even know it existed. I don't know any of this. This is new to me, but I'm just saying water intrigues me.
So it would have to be on that abandonment list.
It's probably not there yet. He said we're about a year away, and he's one of the old timers that lives right on the bluff. I mean, he knows what he's talking about. I would trust him. So I'm gonna have to, I'll bring it to his attention, we'll talk about it.
Yeah, because you can go in and,
Well, we want to get something moving. I mean, even if we took and siphoned it and put it back on the side of the, you know, the farm down there in the valley and let it roll back in, it's being moved. And that's,
All you have to do is just, like I said earlier, just spray some WD-40 on it to remove the rust. You know, any action that you take.
right, well, and I'll have a discussion with this man and
Yeah.
just see what he knows, because he's an old timer, he used to watch that function. I'm new in the
Yeah.
area. But I'm just putting the pieces together.
Interesting.
Let's just say there's 2,000 people on that list. 1,700 of them, they'll get that water, because there might be 200-300 that take action, the rest, total naivety. Same way with taking your land when they find the Indians. We sold the cabin back in Wisconsin. Right after we sold it, they came in and said that they found some, you know, airheads, whatever, shut down the entire thing. The guys who bought it couldn't develop it, nothing. So, you know, it's along that same premise, the state or federal. When they start coming in, they start pulling shenanigans, it's not just about money talks, it's about a power grab and or, you know, these guys like that guy that sold all the water to Denver. Those roots run deep. They're working on some things, obviously, you know that.
You are so right, and thank you for pointing that out, because it's kind of, it's patternistic, and I don't know, you know, but this Gary Boyce, I don't know if it was Gary Boyce or not, but
I just remember the picture, I'll never forget it. Just look at the guy standing with his legs apart like a cowboy, worth $500 million, because he figured out how to set water.
And he got a lot of his funding from Maurice Strong out of Canada. And so it's just really interesting how this is all starting to tie together.
well, Maurice Strong goes back to the United Nations.
Yeah.
Did you know that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, they're all tied together. And it's just interesting to see how they are working this formula with things like abandonment, with
Right.
things like it's mind-boggling. Is what I
It's
started.
much
thinking
easier
about
to take this water than run a pipeline from the Midwest. I mean, the water coming at that farm that we sold, that's now annexed into a small town the size of Abandonment, Colorado, it's probably worth more, or will be worth more, the entire farm at some point. That's a lot of water.
Yeah.
And you're talking about
Take all this
200 gallons a
water
minute.
thing, and then all of a sudden say, well, wait a minute, West Slope, you abandoned all this water, we want it over here.
So, here's another Betty.
I have a question. If you're on that abandonment list and they're asking you to fill out the form, is there a time limit on that? Or
Oh,
is
thank
it-
you. Thank you for asking that, Betty. There is, but this is really critical to know. The time limit, I think, is December 31st, 2021. But I would urge everybody to ignore that due date. They've got a July 1, 2021 date filed with the court, okay, by December 31st, 2021. But I would urge everyone to fill out their do not intend to abandon my water right now. And not only that, but fill it out with a really strong statement that says, please remove me from your list.
Well,
Period.
How do you know you're on the abandoned list?
You're supposed to get a letter.
Well, but if you know how that can go.
Yeah, I know, but you're
So
supposed to get a letter.
Can you
So
go to the state and ask for it?
But you need to have him fill out the form, whether he's got the letter or not. He needs to fill
Well,
out
it's
this form.
actually, I think the ditch company, we'll have to find out who's got those rights.
Right,
He wasn't
exactly.
specific, he would just said, that's our water,
yeah,
collectively.
exactly. Find
Just like you
out.
were talking about,
Find out,
collectively.
yeah. And make sure They make it really hard for you because
Well,
you have to
absolutely.
pull all the forms off the internet and everything. And how the heck are us senior citizens? My husband wouldn't be able to do it.
Well, and you can't get
And
a
it's
with
really
anybody.
hard for
They'll
me
keep
to
it that
do
way through 2021. You can't meet with
Exactly.
anybody.
Yeah.
Holly did find the form and she sent it to me, so if anybody wants the form, I can get it to you.
Yes.
So,
We'll
And
take
you
it.
can have
but I'll
this, you
need,
can have this
I'll
one
need your
too.
name.
But it's extremely critical and,
I mean, we're talking about allocation here that's probably thousands of gallons.
Oh,
Thousands.
if
Tens
there's
of thousands.
2,000 people in District 1 alone, can you imagine what it is statewide?
Well, this is like 4 ditch companies, Butte Ditch, I mean, it's a big deal that he's talking about. And the pump station's huge. 12-inch pipe coming out of the river.
Wow.
But they haven't done
They
any
couldn't, I
other.
don't know what, he said we're about less than a year away from losing that. That's just exactly what he said.
So then it's been
2 months.
10 years since it's been active.
I'll have to ask some questions, but I'll have a meeting with him. It's just across the road from me.
So, a term that is being tossed around a lot with the Colorado River District, that is our district, is demand management. And so we need to be paying really close attention to those words, demand management. It's a pie in the sky right now, but it's what they're talking about, it's what they're wanting to do. And Holly and I found the demand management in the Walton Family Foundation's handbook. And it's what the Colorado River District, they're talking a lot about it with our commissioners. And I'll turn the time over to Holly because there's a lot to talk about with this demand management.
Okay, so demand management is supposed to be tied to the drought contingency program that the 7 basin states on the Colorado River that they agreed to, I think it was just last year. But what I think is happening in Colorado is they're trying to take that demand management program and turn it into a water marketing program. That's why the abandonment list is so interesting. And there are just a lot of people thinking that the water is going to fill Lake Powell. Lake Powell evaporates 600,000 acre-feet of water a year. So what is 50,000 acre-feet of water going to do in Lake Powell? Pretty much nothing. So the water is not going to Lake Powell. It can't go to California because of the Colorado River Compact, 1922. It divides the upper states from the lower states. In fact, that's the reason of the compact, is because they saw that the lower states were developing faster, California, were developing faster than the upper states. So they wanted to do something so that we would actually have water in the future.
That's the claim.
Yeah,
Right.
well, so what do you mean by that, though? You're going to have to explain that because I don't know.
Go ahead, please.
Oh, okay. So,
Wait a minute, I want to hear what she wants to say.
So the real threat has always been the East Slope. And right now, in our government, we have people that have been appointed by Democrat governors for the last 40 years. So I have a article at home, and it says that the Colorado Constitution does not recognize the Rocky Mountains, basically saying that anything in Colorado is legal for using anywhere in Colorado, water, that is. And Denver, the Front Range, I'll just say that, Denver, the Front Range has, I can't think of the word, I'm sorry. Denver, the Front Range has 8 reservoirs planned for taking West Slope water. They have the Gross Dam, they're trying to raise, Chimney Hollow, and another one I found called Wild Horse Reservoir. So those are 3 that are pretty close to completion, or they're working on, and then they have 5 more. People wonder why the Colorado River is running so low, because they're already taking 500,000+ acre feet of water right now.
How do they get it?
They take it through tunnels, they take it through ditches. A lot of it is
To the
tunnels
other side of the mountains?
to,
This,
yep, to the east
that was
slope.
the article I read.
Well, you got
Isn't that what
two
Dillon
tunnels.
Dam?
I'm sorry?
Dillon Dam,
Yeah, Dillon?
I remember when it was built and it was all water to
Yeah,
go
that's all Denver water.
And then the
to the
Grant,
eastern slope.
Grant County up there is all Denver.
Right, Grand Lake.
But those are the only 2 tunnels going over there.
But there's 27 trans-mountain diversions. There's a total of 27. Not all of them are big.
Yeah.
But who was it that told me how big the pipes were? They're like 12 feet tall, pumping water from the west slope to the east slope. Yeah,
Already.
already.
And so our concern isn't California. Our concern is the eastern slope.
Right. But you know, they want to deflect what they're doing. So they'll say anything. We're going to fill Lake Powell. We're going to send it to California. The real problem is Arizona. But the real problem is the Front Range.
But the environmentalists play a role in this too, in that they want recreation, so they don't want grazing or cattle or,
Anything
Well, that's the
productive.
last thing there is.
yeah, they want recreation.
Right, yeah. And another non-governmental organization that you didn't mention was the Nature Conservancy.
Oh, yes, and so they're right over here at the Farmers Reservoir. We need to really be watching that closely, this Nature Conservancy. They call it
TNC.
TNC.
It
And
sounds like
somehow they're
everything's-
doing something with the fruit growers, is that the name of that?
Yeah.
So we need to be really paying close attention to that.
Right, because they come in with a lot of money and a lot of pie in the sky that they're helping the environment. But just a couple days ago, I found an article about Australia. And the Nature Conservancy has a water bank in Australia. And what's happened is that the money will go to the people that are making the most profit. So part of it's called the Murray-Darling River system over there. It's called the Murray-Darling Water Bank. So the money is going to almond growers. The water is going to almond growers, and then they dry up the stream so that the natives there and the other smaller farmers don't have water. So unless you have a lot of money, you can't really buy water, because somebody that's making a lot of money off of almonds is going to have first shot at it because they have more money, more water.
That's exactly what I mean by it's patternistic. They use pretty much the same formula. They're doing the same thing in California. The almond growers are involved there. I mean, it's, but I'd like to insert something here in respect to what it is that you can really, really do, is you can demand that our state water engineers administer water and prior appropriation. They're not. It's on record that they're not. And if everybody in this room called the state waters engineer and wrote the state waters engineer and said, we hereby demand that you administer water and prior appropriation. And if we all started putting pressure, because they're the ones they're at the helm. They're the captain of this ship, and they're running us right off into the iceberg and everywhere else.
Yeah.
And so if we put pressure on the state water engineers,
Are you talking about each division engineer, or are you talking about Kevin Rain?
I'm talking about Kevin Rain
Okay,
and each division engineer.
okay.
And I've met with Kevin twice now in person, intensive. And he'll dance, and he'll dance, and he'll dance. but they are not administering water and prior appropriation, and we have that on testimony at the Capitol multitude of times from one of the top hydrologists in Colorado. So I know that to be true. And I've also, I double check with the smart guys, and the smart guys all tell me the same thing.
We're screwed.
We are not.
So that's why we've got to really put the pressure on Kevin Ryan.
Kevin Ryan.
Kevin
So
Ryan.
everybody write that name down, Kevin Ryan.
If you put pressure on these guys.
He's the state water engineer, Kevin Ryan, Kevinrein, Kevin Ryan. And I'm serious, because that's what's happening. And if I had not heard that multiple times at the Capitol from the top guys, I wouldn't have the authority to say that. But because I've heard that enough times over the years from the top guys that know what the hell they're talking about. But from a layperson's standpoint, I can prove to you that they're not administering water in prior appropriation. And I can explain it in a way that every person in this room would understand it, because it was not that long ago and I didn't understand it until I melted it down. And it's so simple that that's the hardest part to understand.
And so the simplicity of prior appropriation is first in right, first in line.
First in time, first in right, right? That's,
Yeah, first in time, first in right.
And it goes with the flow, and so it's really easy to remember that your senior dates are always when they had water to put to beneficial use. And so when you have junior water rights in years of drought and so forth, and so low precip, etc., demanding that they get more delivery of their water than what they're allocated, that's unreasonable, and it's out of priority. Also remember that the state, as near as we can figure, and when I say we, again, I mean my guys, the whole entire state was fully appropriated by 1879. Everything after that is over appropriation, and we are beyond over appropriation.
But you know what, when they start piping those ditches, our whole water system is piped, and they're saving 40 to 60,000 acre feet a year. So that water is just going right down to the line.
Well,
But we're low on we're close to the state line.
But that goes back to that piece that we were talking about when you first got here, in that those on the river have the priority, and then the association came in and they have the priority, and then they divvy it out to all of us inside the association.
now I understand that. I understand what you're saying. But there is still a date of appropriation. And when you think back to the fact that the state was over appropriated, what they're doing is they're actually moving water around,
Yeah.
big time moving water around. I'll give you an example. There's a little dam that was built quickly south of Denver, in the off of I-25 in Lincoln, heading toward Colorado Springs. And my husband went on a tour of this. It's called the Rooter Hess. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Rooter Hess. And he was taken on a tour of the Rooter Hess. And after that, every time we'd pass it, he'd say, "I don't understand how they're going to fill that." And I said, "I don't understand what you're talking about." And he said, "Well, they said they were going to fill it with runoff." Well, now how do you fill with runoff when it's been on a hill? And so finally, I started digging into it, and I asked some people who leased that land to run cattle, and just a whole combination of things, and found out, that they had basically picked up that property for about $3,000 an acre from Rosie Rooter Hess and stuff like that. But I still couldn't figure out how they were filling it. And so one time I just kind of made a wisecrack to my husband, and I said, oh, they're probably taking it off the South Platte River. He said, well, how in the world would they do that? And I said, I don't know, they probably just pipe it. And it was only a couple weeks later, and I was listening to the minutes of a meeting that Bill Owens' company, Renewed Strategy, and Bob Lemke's company, United Sanitation, were presenting to the town of Parker. And they said, and so what we're going to do is we're going to build a pipe off the Platte River and run along E470.
Well, they're right about runoff. You know, they build a reservoir and they have a drainage into it, and they buy all that drainage.
Yeah, and so it was a few years later that I was at a meeting down in Elbert County, and one of the county commissioners came up to me. He was bragging about the fact that they were filling it at 25 point something acre feet a day. And I'm like, wait a minute, how do you do that with runoff? How do you have such an accurate, what are you telling me? And somebody must have got to him, because when I saw him a month later, he cut a wide swath around me.
Yeah.
So Holly has that same experience
See?
a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they all of a sudden, they go mute.
Yeah, yeah, they're
Oh, yeah.
real eager to talk to you, and then,
Well, you talk about the purpose of this, well, look at Denver. I've been over here 15 years anyway, and I go back there once in a while, and I cannot believe how it's grown. Like 470 down there, all the way south and around. Nothing but houses, and they're building out. You know, the airport's gonna be surrounded by houses too.
Oh yeah, and then they're gonna get lawsuits for the flyovers.
Then they'll have to move in again.
yeah, yeah. So, but let's talk about this demand management, and then we probably better call it,
Okay.
And explain to us why we're not screwed.
I'm sorry, what?
You said we're not screwed.
I said
Oh.
that.
You did, and I'm waiting for your.
Okay, you know, God can change anything in a day. And I am a fierce Christian, believing that God has a plan. I mean, look at all the good that came out of the COVID. All of these water meetings that they used to have in Cremeens or in, up, you had to drive for hours and spend the night. Well, I couldn't afford to do that or take the time. So now all of these water meetings are on the internet, and I can sit in the comfort of my own home, and I can go up to the Yamba and I listen to what they're saying. And I can go, I don't go up to the East Slope, sorry. But I can go to the Colorado River District and listen to what they're saying. So I just really believe that people care about water. And I believe that water has a certain significance, and it's spiritual. And I think that that God is going to do something about it. I mean, He needs people to help Him. He's not just going to. Well, I'm sometimes
He sent
pray.
us the boat, and He sent us the helicopter.
I sometimes pray that He would just have this miraculous splitting of the Rocky Mountains, and we'd get all of our water back. But
Well, see, that's why they need to appropriate, and they need to administer in prior appropriation. Because if they did that for at least 5 years, the water would sort itself out. And the people who didn't, get water historically wouldn't have water. It's as simple as that.
right.
And they'd have to make adjustments. But what they did on the South Platte River is they violated Judge Roger Klein's decision on the Waz case and shut down all of the wells when they were only supposed to shut down the wells that were post 1969. They shut down all of the wells and deliberately overhydrated the entire upper end of the South Platte River. So now there's a huge underground reservoir that no one can see, and it's not evaporating, it's pretty cool, and that has ensured the eastern part of Colorado perennial in-stream flow. which, you know, they're getting it way out there by Julesburg and so forth and
It
so on.
goes all the way into Kansas and all that, the aquifer down there.
Well,
And
they,
they had an article here in the Sentinel about that last year, I think, about how it has dropped.
how what is dropped?
The level of the aquifer down there. And they figure it'll take 200 years to bring it back up.
Oh, you're talking about the
If they did-
Ocala aquifer, the one that the,
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a big one. It goes into Texas, it goes Colorado, eastern Colorado, they have, I think it doesn't hit North Dakota, but it comes all
it's
back around.
massive, the
It's
Ocala.
massive.
Yeah, but there's another one right there under Weld County,
Where?
Weld County,
Oh,
Colorado.
probably.
Yeah,
Well,
that's
County's
the
probably part of it.
At the underground reservoir where they're storing all their water.
And they keep using it, and it's going down, and now they're trying to, because out on the plains, they use the wheels, you know, they got
Right.
big
Pumps.
pumps out there that have been pumping this thing for a long, long time, and the level is going down, and they're trying to decrease the usage of it so that it'll, because it only gets so much water in it, you know, to replenish it, and they say it'll take 100 years to replenish it.
Well, here's kind of the interesting part of that. It might be getting lower on the eastern part of Colorado, which I kind of really doubt because I know that there's flooding in Sterling and around those areas too. But it has raised the water table in the upper part of the South Platte River to where it is beyond its historic approximate 20 foot to 2 feet and surfacing, and as creating a tremendous amount of problems, like for the town of Gilchrist, and so it destroyed their waste management system and everything. And Harry Strohauer, he had to move half of his potato operation down to Clayton, New Mexico, because it was rotting his tubers, and he had to keep water on the vines, and he couldn't because they shut his water off.
That's surface water.
Well, it's all connected, and so anyhow,
This aquifer is way down.
the aquifer is raising the water table tremendously, and so and that's
The
what.
article said that it was.
Well, that might be the Ocala. This is
I
the
think it is.
a different reservoir that no one can see,
Yeah.
and they don't want to talk about, and they pretend they don't have the
Well,
the
look at-
technology
look
to.
at the water Denver, look at the
They
water
do, yeah.
Denver's sending down on. Look at the water that Denver's sending down on, you know, the surface water. And we're talking, you know, down there, because you take all the septic systems and all the other stuff, and putting the water back in the river and stuff, it's concentrated in one area in there, and so it will raise the water.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad, and then you have water that's being wasted across the border into Nebraska, even though, you know, we're supposed to. 2006, that was kind of a red flag year for me in research, in that they had the WAS case where it was, which means water augmentation system. They had that big WAS case, and that's where the lower end said we're not getting our water. They're stealing all our water. Those guys on the upper end are stealing all our water. They didn't have to show burden of proof. Water court is kangaroo court. You don't have any opportunity to cross-examine the witnesses or anything like that. The judge generally determines who the plaintiffs and defendants and all that kind of stuff. And water court is being really used it's another way that they're stealing our water, is through water court.
I don't see why they just won't start these big cities.
Exactly.
Start
Recycling it. If they can do it in Century City or Center City or whatever they call it in Las Vegas, absolutely. And they should, that should be a requirement, I think, recycling.
Oh, yeah.
I think developers should have to either recycle the water or tell people they don't have any,
Yeah.
period.
Yeah.
Because this is a semi-arid desert.
Or separate it into where you can water your lawn and your toilet goes this way and that way and you drink out of this faucet.
So we never did touch on, we need to real quick touch on demand management.
Oh, well, we did touch on it some, but,
Explain what it is, demand management.
well, it's water banking.
Oh, that sounds
So
like
simple.
SP rap. That sounds like SP rap. Oh my gosh, that's SP rap redo.
SP rap.
Yeah, South,
Of Platte.
how does that work again? SP rap, South Platte Water,
Like,
oh shoot, augmentation, something, I forget now what the acronym stands for, but it's a spin-off of the Platte River Recovery Implementation Program, where, oh, if you're a good little boy and girl, you can just give us this money, and that'll be an insurance policy for when we need more of your water.
So, but simply, water banking.
okay, so,
You pay them to bank your water. It's like if, for us here on the Grand Mesa water users, if we buy so many shares of water out of one of the lakes up there, and we don't use it that year, we can lease it to somebody else, and charge so much money. They used to let you bank it, meaning that if you didn't use your water that year, you could use it the next year. They don't let you do that anymore because there is more of a shortage now.
right, so what they say is, well, they want us on the western slope to fallow ground.
Yeah,
And leave it dry, and then they will take that water and ship it to the east slope where they'll build another subdivision. And they want to do it what they call dynamically, which means, okay, so you fallow your 100 acres this year, and then Julie fallows her 100 acres next year, and somebody else over here fallows their 100 acres the following year. So it's always moving around. But the problem with leasing water, because they don't buy the water rights, they just lease them. When that city gets built out to the airport, and all those other subdivisions get built out, they're going to come back on you and say, well, now we have to have your water, and we're going to take it by eminent domain. So,
That's exactly what they're gonna want.
Or they could do another little tricky move and say that because you weren't the one that used it, you
right.
abandoned it. There you go.
Yeah.
But the problem being is that Colorado water has an attached beneficial use. Our water is agricultural water. So how did they think they're going to turn that? I mean, just because they pipe it through a pipe and over to the eastern slope, does that miraculously make it?
They have to have a change of use.
Right.
All it takes is a legislator to change it, and they'll change it.
Well, actually, they have to make an application through water court for change of use, and that's, whatever, but it's,
But they're trying to get around it. They call them
Yeah.
ATMs, alternative transfer mechanisms. And that's what the fallowing program is. It's an
They're
alternative.
baffling you with their brilliance, how
So,
they put things out to you.
yes,
So with that, say they do this, and you're the one that fallows, do they pay you for what you brought from off that?
Oh, yeah.
Or you just stuck for nothing?
It gets even better. Okay, so the Colorado cattlemen were going around proposing to this fallowing project to different groups of ranchers or whoever was interested in listening.
is it Colorado Cattlemen's Association
Yes,
that was doing this?
CCA, yes. And they were saying that, okay, well, your corn crop is worth $256 an acre. So our fallowing program will pay you for not watering $256 an acre. But then, when it goes across to the east slope again, another miracle happens. That same water that you were paid $256 for an acre is now worth $2,256.
Exactly.
So they want to lowball the farmers and then take the profit.
Now, I'm going to jump in and say something really that'll maybe horrify a few people here, but CCA and the Colorado Farm Bureau opposed every water bill that we presented in the legislative since 2011, to my knowledge. They testified against every one of them. They even testified against HB 1278, which was a study of the overhydration on the South Platte River. The Colorado Farm Bureau, I hate to say this because we used to be members,
They're not friendly to
but
farmers.
they are not friendly to farmers. They got in bed with the TNC and they're just part of the real estate business.
And remember, the TNC is the
Nature
Nature
Conservancy.
Conservancy.
Yeah.
So, one last thing I want to bring up, you brought up the WAS.
Mhm.
And there is a gentleman that was involved in that case, and it's Tom somebody.
Check. Tom Check.
Tom Check.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'll talk a little bit about the NGOs, which is non-governmental organization. The university, Denver University, got a $1 million grant from an anonymous donor,
Probably Pat Stryker.
probably, and created One World, One Water, and put Tom Check as the director of One World, One Water. And he was deeply involved in that WAS case, so.
Well, Tom, yeah, he's at Metro State and he has a seat there, and I'm pretty sure Pat Stryker, I mean, I shouldn't say that. She allegedly, supposedly, same with Bill Ritter, she probably bought his seat at CSU.
Well, that isn't supposedly, Pat Stryker did see
By
Bill
okay.
Ritter. Her foundation, which
Did I
is the
call him
Bob
Ritter?
Ritter,
What is this?
Ritter.
It's Ritter, yeah, I know.
$300,000 per year,
Mm.
created that position for him at CSU, and it was her Bohemian Foundation,
Al Yates.
which is an open society
Al Yates.
foundation.
Yeah, that's Al Yates.
So,
But, oh my gosh, the Wise case. Somebody have a question back there?
No, I was just gonna say.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I've heard the term lately in my research for different things, that if you control the water, you control the people.
Well, and this is where it gets to be really over our heads and why it's really important to make that call to Kevin Ryan. I mean hammer on him. Let him know that you know that the state is not administering the water in prior appropriation. Now, your division engineers, I sincerely believe that they think they are, because they're down in the weeds, they're in the minutia, they're into measurements and all of this. And I honestly don't think that they know that they're being lied to and that they are not administering water in prior appropriation.
Well, heck no, they work for the government.
so
And Tom Check, this gentleman that Barb mentioned, what he did is he formed a group of water users called GASP, and he said, okay, I'm going to take all of you guys and we'll go to court to make sure that you get to continue using your water. And the whole thing, if you read the Waz case, you just are astonished to see how that whole thing just slowly reverses. And they had the same attorney for both the plaintiffs and the defendants, who Judge Roger Klein refused to the demands of what they called the plaintiffs, which were, I mean, what a joke. But anyhow, those were the water rights owners, the GASP people, asked that this attorney be recused, withdraw from representing both, and Judge Roger Klein refused. But the thing that they missed, and this is what I go around with Kevin Ryan on, is that what they missed are the words pre-existing, valid, vested, senior, which Judge Roger Klein reminded throughout the whole hearing that those were not to be harmed or injured, or various and sundriest ways of saying the senior, the vested, the valid, the pre-existing water rights. The reason for the whole 1969 Act and the reason for augmentation was to protect those pre-existing senior, valid, vested water rights. That was only reason for it. And so that anything junior after 1969, they were the ones that had to file put together an augmentation plan. And as this whole thing started to reverse, and pretty soon they listened to the lower end and said, oh, you know, they're stealing all our water, those big bad mean people upstream, and we're not getting any water. The whole thing reversed to where the decision was to shut down anything that was post-1969, but instead, whoever implemented the WAS case took all of the, regardless of the rights, and has shut them all down. And that was a complete violation of Judge Roger Klein's decision. They ignored the key words. The key words in everything in statute, anything that you read that has to do with law, always look for the words pre-existing or valid or vested. Those are the most key words of all. And if you have those rights are never extinguished. And then, all of a sudden, Tom Check ends up down at Metro State teaching One World, One Water. So we don't know who masterminded that particular execution, but they did it brilliantly. Somebody knew that if you overhydrate the upper end by shutting down all the wells, that you would develop a perennial in-stream flow that would go out to the beyond its historic dry up. And I have the charts. I actually have these old 1898 flow charts that are wrinkled and crumpled, and you fold them clear out like this, that show historically where the South Platte River historically would dry up. And rarely did it ever go beyond Julesburg. Rarely, if any. And there you have it. I mean, that's where we are. They have not administered water and prior appropriation for sure since then. Now, the reason 2006 is such a pivotal year or red flag year, okay, hold the thought of these guys on the lower end saying, we don't have any water. They're stealing all our water. At the very same time, Bill Owens signed the South Platte River implementation, they call it PRIP, the PRIP, the Platte River Recovery Implementation Program in 2006, giving away 10,000 acre feet to Nebraska.
And he was sued over that.
I don't know. I honestly don't know. But anyhow, where'd he get the water? If they say that there's no water, where did Bill Owens get 10,000 acre feet water to give away to Nebraska? Either that or meet the commitment. Now, another thing that they're doing that's really sneaky is you will not see the Platte River Recovery Implementation Program in the Colorado Water Plan at all. You won't see it in any of the materials. They don't want anybody to know that this is going on because, as it turns out, they're using the Platte River as their carriage vessel to get the water from the upper end to the lower end where they're peeling off and retiming it, selling it to Denver and power plants and everything else. They have pivots out there in that semi-arid desert. I see them all the time, more and more pivots. Phillips County, Morgan County, all those little counties in the north, east part of Colorado, where they get in their water.
Yeah, pivots use more water than flood irrigation, evaporation.
Okay,
There you have it.
Oh, we have to put one more thing on, and that is don't vote for the increase from the
Oh, yes.
Colorado River District.
vote no on the mill levy increase.
Don't tax yourself for them to steal your water.
Be sure to vote no. Do you know what number that is on your ballot? Julie and I were looking for that.
I don't know.
So, anyway, vote no on the mill levy. And remember to vote no for the popular vote. They have it worded kind is sneaky, so you want to vote no on the popular vote.
Mhm.
So did I say that right, Betty?
National popular vote.
National popular
I
vote.
think we ought to
or no,
vote yes on the Wolves and take them over to Denver.
And vote no on the
Yes,
Wolves.
vote no.
I think they love prairie dogs too.
I just think it's interesting that when you talk about the TNC and the National Conservancy Agency, out of the cold blue yesterday, opening my mail, I had a thing of National Conservancy asking for money.
There you go.
And so if all of a sudden they're in here looking at Hart's Basin and Fruit Growers Reservoir, then they're also sucking money from us, all of a sudden donate money to us.
That's
Yeah,
right.
and I can't remember, and it was Andy Mueller who told Holly and I and Julie, we were at that meeting when he said, now the Fruit Growers Reservoir you need to pay attention to because somehow they're doing something in there and I can't remember what he said.
Okay, but look, when it finally sold 2 or 3 years ago, it had been on the market to sell Hart's Basin for years. Hart's Basin has been on sale for how many years?
Wow.
And nobody wanted Hart's Basin because the land, the grass and the land is not that good because that's where Cedar Ridge's sewer flooded down through there many years ago. Okay, and I was at a meeting when Gary Volk was running his cattle on there, and he even knew that he wouldn't calve. He had to watch it when it was calving time because the calves that were on those fields that had been saturated from the sewer had higher density of dysentery in the calves. So Gary knew at that time, and that's why he wasn't renewing leases. Who did that place sell to? Water attorneys out of Boulder.
There you
I mean,
go.
when I didn't know, I went down to the county assessor's office and who was it sold to? Yeah, they're bringing cattle back and forth and running cattle on there. But I didn't watch last year, but I don't think they're calving their cattle on there because the land's destroyed. But why would these water attorneys out of Boulder buy that property?
Who's that, Ronnie Sperling?
I can't remember the name. It's-
Ronnie Sperling and Mike Shimmons. They're the kind of couple of, they used to be really involved.
Yeah, they run cattle, but, their thing was, oh, they had barbecue to the public. We're gonna keep it a working cattle ranch and everything when they did it. But there was always the question from us up on Service Creek about, can they really take the water? Now, 2 years ago, the Grand Mesa water users were doing a meeting and educating everybody locally. And I don't, at that point, they said that no, they couldn't take the water from there. But who knows what attorneys are doing in the past 2 years.
Yeah, I'd like to know.
Yeah, if you could get that information to me.
Well, the piece of paper's floating around someplace that I got, but the county assessor's office. I mean, I just went in and I said, I want to know the name of these people because I want to buy one of their calves. I see them walking the cow, running the cows past my place. And so the county assessor's office gave me the name of who it sold to.
You can just do a search on the computer for that then.
Yeah.
I mean, Stevenson she said, well, why do you want to know? I said, they're running their cattle up and down past my place and they look pretty good. I want to buy one of their cows. So she handed it to me.
It's simple.
Wow.
I mean, I had heard the rumor that it sold, but nobody knew for sure. And, were these attorneys really going to do something? So
There's cookies in the back too, by the way.
We're not sure who orchestrated the laws, but because Ronnie Sperling and Mike Shimmons are a couple of the, used to be anyway, I've been kind of out of the loop for the past couple of years, the big water broker attorney people, it could be anybody,
Yes.
you know. The TNC is wicked, so is the World Wildlife Foundation, WWF.
Trout Unlimited.
Yeah,
And the Weiss Foundation is paying millions into the Trout Unlimited, and they have an office in Durango.
Right.
So,
Don't buy anything at Walmart. Walton Family Foundation.
yeah, Walton Family Foundation is Walmart.
It's all about money.
It is all about money.
It
Thank
is.
you guys so much
Thank
for
you.
spending your evening with us. We appreciate it, and we hope that you've learned something tonight.
Yes.
And please share. Roni has driven many, many hours. Thank you
Oh, no, this is-
so much.
No,
Thank you.
I just love having the opportunity to share what, my research, I guess you could say.
Yeah,
And thank you, Holly, for
Sure, thank
your information. Wonderful.
that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Another thing to be upset about.